You just confirm you can see that.
We can.
Still see it?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. So first of all, I just want to thank the Certification Network Group for running these events. We at Surpass thoroughly enjoy sponsoring them and being involved in them. And I think one of the wonderful things about it is that we've got, there's still, even though we're remote, we're still engaging with them. We've got 100+ people on this call today, which is great to see. And I think as consumers of these remote sessions, we're much more selective in terms of the information we want to kind of join and attend. So it actually raises the bar for anyone that's delivering content. We're having to be much more selective and much more considerate to people's time that that they're sparing on these Zoom calls, and just small things about sort of bringing sort of positive elements to these sessions, like that music at the beginning. It feels sometimes a slightly awkward space where you've got so many people on there. So it's just small details like that we continue to improve on. So thank you to the Certification Network Group and everyone that's involved in it, and we look forward to sponsoring these into the future. Just very quickly, in terms of Surpass, we've been running since 1985, and our mission is essentially to improve the assessment experience for everyone. It was very much candidate-led at the beginning of our journey when we were developing the software, but as we've worked with, particularly in North America, that end-to-end process from creating items all the way through to delivery. This is about making sure that the overall experience is considered unequal. So it's about improving the assessment experience for everyone. Just quick background, we're 35 years old, 220 people. The images there, just one in Yorkshire, which is north of England. That's our head office. And we've got our North American office, which is based just out, well, it's in Exton in Pennsylvania. Just a quick facts and figures slide. 32 million exams to date, 140 countries we're delivering to, and that equates to something like 25,000 test centers that are using 800 million items, 1.6. When you start rattling some of these numbers off, it becomes they're just huge figures. But I just want to kind of give you a sense of scale there. And then also we've got a global test center network as well, which we operate. End to end, I think in North America we see a lot more focus on item authoring and sort of task management. We've seen a lot more of that, but it's a reminder that we do an end-to-end platform, which includes test delivery. We integrate with technical partners as well. We do online invigilation with our partners at Examity, and there's reporting built into the system. So just give you time. I just want to call out a few of the features. There's so much stuff that goes into Surpass, but some of the stuff we've been doing over the last year since we last spoke to you, spreadsheet simulations, negates the need to have Microsoft Word and Excel or different versions of and technical challenges that causes. So we just baked it into the product instead. For medical space, high fidelity image viewer, that's been in there for a while, but it's a reminder that anyone that needs to have that sort of high res images that they need to zoom in on part of the exam, that's built into it as well. But sort of more topical for today is the sort of the task management and item authoring side of things. The ability to manage items and assign tasks to individual, the SMEs, to be able to review them as a group individually and have a sort of structured work alongside that as well. So there's some great work we've done with the National Board of Medical Examiners and Prometrics to help us along. So we're very proud of that part of the system. And really, I just want to wrap up by saying that we run community events, for Surpass, but anyone's welcome to join them. The next one is on the 6th of July. It's healthcare medical sort of based, and we've got a whole raft of organisations that use Surpass joining us. Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, Royal College of Ophthalmologists, Federation of Royal Colleges of Physicians, the Board of Medical Examiners, National Board of Certified Counsellors, and American Academy of Neurology. They'll all be joining us on the 6th. It's a panel discussion, and the last one was really good for accounting and finance what we did, and there's a couple of links there. So if anyone's interested in joining us, you're very welcome, whether you Surpass or not, or you're just interested to find out more. And if you're interested in finding out anything else and you've got any questions, My email's there, my number's there. You're very welcome to use either. So that's all I want to share with you. Thank you very much for letting us sponsor these events and enjoy today's CNG event. And I'll hand back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Barry. Our other featured sponsor for today is Pearson VUE. And I believe we have James Mooney on the line. James, if you want to go ahead and unmute, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Thanks for the reminder to unmute before I started speaking. And thanks so much for the opportunity to chat with everybody today. Just a few updates, no slides. First, I want to just say how happy I am that this is a webinar or a discussion that's not about online proctoring. I'm very excited to hear a second about something other than online proctoring. I did want to just alert the group that Pearson as a whole, Pearson PLC, has a new CEO. His name is Andy Bird. Among the things that he has championed since he's taken over, which was in the fall, has been the creation of a new global diversity, equity, and inclusion task force that will help Pearson identify some actions to continue to create an inclusive culture. This will include, additionally, ensuring our products and services build a more inclusive society. As most folks here on this call know, Pearson's products and services are well beyond just delivering certification and licensure exams, but certainly Pearson VUE is included in all of the work that's being done with that task force. Second update is that we continue to support our clients as they identify the optimal delivery mode for their programs. We're now delivering more than 300,000 exams a month on OnView, which is our online proctoring platform, while many other clients obviously remain committed to the standardization of our test center channel. And then if there is anyone here that has not yet felt immersed in the discussion about online proctoring and test centers, I would encourage a review of a recent webinar that Eric DiStolfo of Pearson VUE moderated, entitled "Test Centers Are Dead, Long Live Test Centers." You can find that at atphub.org. That's atphub.org. And that's all I have for updates. I just want to say thanks again to Cynthia and others for coordinating and leading these meetings, and enjoy the session.
Great, thank you. And thank you again to Pearson and BTL Surpath. So Taylor, I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started to talk about SME engagement. I think this is, like James, it's a nice switch in topics. I think we've been talking a lot about online proctoring, which is certainly important and has its place, but this is also a challenge regardless of how we're delivering exams. So we're excited to get started. Taylor, I'll turn it on to you.
Awesome. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, I'm seeing some nodding. Excellent. And you can see the slides? All right. Well, welcome everyone. Before we begin, I just wanted to mention a few ways in which you can interact with us today. So as Cynthia mentioned, please go ahead and keep your microphone on mute throughout the session. But if you do have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and share that with the group. You can also use the chat function if you have a question or comment. Depending on pace and timing, we might be able to field some questions during the session, but we've also reserved quite a bit of time at the end for audience Q&A. Barry Porter, thank you, Barry, will be monitoring and kind of curating the questions that you all put. So if your question gets buried in a string of chats, don't worry, we'll capture them. And at the end of the session, we'll get through as many as we can in the order in which y'all entered them into the chat. And then also, after we answer the questions that come through the chat, feel free to unmute or raise your hand. I think there's a raise hand function in WebEx to participate that way. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our panelists today. They're a group of experienced certification professionals who have together worked with thousands of SMEs spanning industries and settings and types of testing programs to support a wide array of activities. So first up, we have Lavina Harless. She's the Senior Director of Examination Services for the Association of Social Work Boards, and she oversees the development and administration of the social work licensing exams used in the US and Canada. And she's also the author of Becoming the SME Whisperer, a culture of engaged, hardworking, and happy subject matter experts. Sorry, creating a culture of engaged, hardworking, and happy SMEs. And so this was a resource she developed in conjunction with ICE. So hopefully Lavina will be able to help us all become SME whisperers today. Next up, we have Alejandra Amador Garcia. She's the manager for the certification content group at the Project Management Institute. Currently, Alejandra's team routinely engages with over 1,200 SMEs dispersed globally. And prior to joining PMI, she was an independent assessment consultant and worked with SMEs in many different fields to develop valid assessments. Next up is Nancy Willevers. She is the Vice President of Certification Operations at the Society for Human Resource Management. And she oversees exam development, certificate care, and testing administration at SHRM. Before joining SHRM, Nancy held various management positions in industry and academia, and she specializes in test development and training. And lastly, we have Jared Zern, who is the Vice President of Examination and serves as a member of the senior leadership team at the National Council of Architectural Registration Boards. Jared is responsible for the strategic direction of exam-related initiatives, professional ethics initiatives, and oversight of and participation in research on the architectural profession. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. And before we begin, I'm going to briefly give some context for today's panel, but we will spend the majority of the time hearing from our panelists. So as certification test developers or end users or administrators, we often rely on the knowledge and experience of subject matter experts to develop face valid, appropriate, and high quality test materials. In many cases, we also rely on their initial buy-in to ensure the test will be well received by a broad constituency of eligible examinees once it's ultimately deployed. So how can we best ensure that our SMEs are motivated and engaged to produce high quality materials, provide thoughtful input, and contribute in a positive way to the assessment, development, and validation process? Our goal today is to allow you an opportunity to hear from your peers in the industry about their experiences engaging and motivating SMEs, as well as some nuanced topics pertaining to working with SMEs, such as considering unique types of SMEs and how to leverage these groups, as well as working with SMEs in a virtual environment. As evidenced by this slide, SME involvement can take a number of forms in the process of developing and administering a certification exam. For instance, SMEs can serve on advisory committees or certification boards. They can provide industry perspectives for strategic planning. They can participate in job analysis or competency modeling studies. They work to define assessment specifications or test blueprints, writing and reviewing items, serving as raters in content validation processes, providing feedback on potential bias or fairness issues, developing scoring keys and rubrics, participating as sample test takers or pilot testers, documenting critical incidents, and providing a universal or global perspective. So for today's panel session, I'll be posing 6 questions to our panelists, and 2 to 3 panelists will respond to each question. As I mentioned before, we've reserved some time at the end for audience Q&A, but again, feel free to pose your questions in the chat, and our team will be monitoring the chat and curating questions for us to cover. All right, let's begin. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can see your esteemed panelists. Let's see, let me get Alejandra up here. So can everybody see the panelists at the top? I'm not sure if this is working. No, they're kind of all over. Well, once you begin talking, you'll move up to the top. Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start us off with our first question, and then I will turn it over to our panelists to respond. So the first question is, what criteria do you consider when selecting SMEs to participate in certification design, development, and maintenance? If you could, describe different criteria for different stakeholder groups. So I'm going to kick this one over to Jared to start us off.
Thank you, Taylor. So this is a really big question, and I would actually break it down by the phases of the work that's being done. So I'll just start with the design phase. I think the key from a criteria perspective, from NCARB's perspective, is really getting the broadest base possible. I know we all love our subject matter expert volunteers, but like I said, I work in architecture, and I actually don't want architects working on everything. I probably shouldn't say that in a recorded webinar, but you really don't, right? Like, we need to know when it's appropriate to have an architect working on a project, but also when it's better to not have an architect, because sometimes when you're too close to the profession, you don't see everything in the same way. So NCARB actually really tries to go out and engage with others in the built environment, especially in the design side of what is a licensure exam. It's great that architects provide content, knowledge, but at the same time, we need to hear from code officials, because they're the ones who review the drawings that architects put together. We need to hear from contractors. They're the ones who actually have to work with the design that the architects put together, and so on and so forth, all the way to public members. So we're trying to really connect with just public members or users of the built environment. And that in itself can be a real challenge, because it's easy to motivate an architect to get involved in the architect licensing exam. It's part of their profession. That seems to have not been a challenge. But how do you go get a school board member to engage in talking to a national organization about the design of a licensure program? And I think that's one of the key challenges for us, is to move beyond the subject matter expert to all of the stakeholders that really exist in the world. So that's our challenge, I think, from a design perspective. And I think Levine is also going to weigh in on this, and I'll let her pick up on some of the other parts.
Thanks, Jared. And thanks for the opportunity to speak today. Let's see, in terms of subject matter experts in the social work licensing exam, we're a little bit different from Jared in terms of what their goal is. We are basically trying to recruit folks who are social workers to do this important work. We haven't, kind of broadened that circle at this point, but it's certainly something that we can look at in the future as we continue to re-envision how we build our exams, which we're in the process of doing. But the subject matter experts for our exam development program, they have to start as item writers. So we have a definite entry point into the program, which might be different for other folks, where they really need to, we need to make sure that they have a social work degree. Of course, they have a license in good standing, and that they don't have any outstanding disciplines, of course, against them. And so those folks are paid. So we do pay our item writers, and I know that's coming, in some of the questions in the that we have here for the panel. But I think that's one of the ways that we can kind of get them in the door. But then after that, there's quite a bit of commitment there. So we certainly, when they apply to be item writers, not only do they have to submit that information, but they also have to do a screening document where they have to write some questions, review some questions. We want to make sure that they know how to do this work before we, sign them up and start paying them to do the work. So, because as we all know, item writing is, it's a fine art. It's not for everyone, of course. And so, we want to make sure that they have the qualifications to do that. So cover letter and that assessment and a resume. And this year we had over 350 item writer applicants, which really kind of blew us out of the water. And we only select about 20 to become item writers. So that was certainly interesting to get all that interest for the program, but we're very careful to make sure we have a range of diverse ages, geographic locations, practice settings, as well as making sure that we're balancing the class for race and ethnicity as well. So each item writer class is balanced in that way. So yeah, and then those item writers go on to become part of our pool of item writers. And then if they're proficient at doing that work, then we will appoint them to be on the exam committee. And that's where the natural progression kind of comes in terms of what their roles are.
So, and Taylor, I'll follow up. Levine and I go back a long way. So, I mean, we always discuss and debate these issues. One of the big, I would say, differences at NCARB is that we're willing to sort of take on new item writers that are totally fresh, like unknown to us. And to some degree, we actually want this. We go out and specifically try to recruit what we call a recently licensed. So somebody who's just been licensed in the last 3 years. And purposefully, like, we don't want them to have been involved with NCARB, and we put them on our item writing committees to kind of be a check and balance against some of our more seasoned item writers. And there's been a history, I will say, a bit at NCARB where sometimes volunteers will hang on forever. I don't know, maybe some of you don't have this problem, but sometimes it's hard to get rid of a volunteer. And so the reality is we're constantly looking for churn. We want new people in the pipeline. We want them to challenge the seasoned item writers to say, like, yeah, because I will tell you, my experience has been the longer somebody's writing items, the trickier and trickier their questions get, because they're always looking for that, oh, I haven't written an item about this, or I haven't written an item about that. And you need that sort of new voice to bring them back down to that minimally competent level of, like, yeah, I get you've been doing this for 5 or 6 or 7 years. Yeah, no. We got to bring it back down. So we really we cast a wide net. Our volunteer pool this year, coming year for our exams, is going to be over 150 volunteers working on the ARE. And I would say at least 25% of them are new to the pool. And that's our goal, is this constant turnover.
Yep, same here, Jared, for the social work exams. Those folks are brand new as item writers coming in, typically unknown. We call them unknown quantities to ASWB, that they are not really aware of. Sometimes they don't even know where they take the exam. They're like, we go to our board, we go to ASWB, who is it? And then they figure out that we're the people. So I think that is really important to bring in folks who are closer to that, do no harm first day on the job, protection of the public piece that we're really after. And, if we don't have those younger folks closer to that age or closer to that setting, then it's going to sometimes be hard for folks who've been, like you said, well seasoned.
Great, thank you so much. Nancy or Alejandra, do either of you have anything else to add?
I do not know.
Awesome. Well, thank you. That was helpful. I definitely learned a lot from that. I share in your observation that the more tenured item writers tend to resort to tricky items as they get further along, and definitely agree that having some fresh perspectives is helpful. So one follow-up question for you, Jared, is when you have, the new and veteran SMEs, do you intentionally have them engage with one another, or is it more informal coaching or partner work? What methods have you found helpful?
So ours is rather intentional. So we will slot our new volunteers in work groups with the seasoned to naturally balance them. And then we have in our item writing workflow a coordinator role. So people are assigned to an item writing work group, but each work group has a coordinator, which is the seasoned mentor that can then work with them one-on-one. And we know we do the nice thing where we give you a really small assignment to start and let the coordinator give you feedback. So just like write 2 items or 3 items, and then get that feedback and get on the right track early in the development process. And then we'll hit you with the 15 item writing homeworks later on in the year.
Great, thanks. All right, well, in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next question. How do you design your process to boost commitment and engagement? Consider activities such as onboarding, activity design, activity preparation, those types of things. So I'll start with Lavina this time.
Thanks so much. So in terms of the social work boards and how we boost commitment, it really starts with a sense of belonging and making sure that these folks kind of feel like they're part of something and they understand where they fit in the bigger picture. So that's a really important part of orientation. But before they get to orientation, we typically mail them a goodie box, quite frankly, that has swag in it, that gets them excited about being part of this group. We have branded swag. We do fleece jackets and say, bundle up on your plane ride in your your ASWB fleece jacket to make it to the meeting, right? So we also do textbook stipends for item writers as well. Those kinds of things go a long way, particularly if you have writers who aren't academic in nature and they're practitioners. They may not necessarily have access to textbooks, so we provide stipends for our item writers to help them with that. And then, like I said, the orientation is a time for them to gather together, get to know each other. We always do a happy hour with them so we can kind of be social first before we get into that really formal space of training them about items. So we have the writers meet us the evening before as they're coming in, and you know, these are face-to-face meetings, so that is a requirement. And this year we aren't doing face-to-face, but it will certainly be something that we want to return to because, of course, we all know that there are challenges with that in terms of face-to-face, but there's no substitute for face-to-face, and certainly get more engagement out of our SMEs with that. So yeah, we, like I said, we do pay our item writers, but we do not pay our exam committee members. So as those item writers come in, they do that work, they're proficient, then they can move on to the next phases and stages of the exam development process. So when we meet face to face with them, we typically go to nice hotels. In pretty decent locations. We try to have one travel meeting a year. Of course, we meet quarterly because we're producing forms quarterly. And so we meet with them in DC 3 times a year and then probably somewhere fun, you know, 1 time of year. And we give them time off in the evenings so they can do whatever they need to do. And it's not all of their time isn't completely structured and scheduled, but we do try to have a group activity like a dinner or something like that at least once. And we've just found that this networking is critical and allowing them to have time to do that networking, connect with each other. It's just tremendous. The community in the social work exams that's been built around this, where folks are connecting with each other and working with each other. And we just, I just talked with one of our subject matter experts who has been in Mexico with another subject matter expert that she met, that they're working on a similar project at their universities. So this is just a great way to get them to connect face to face. And the other thing we do to try to engage this sense of community is that we have this annual yearbook of the entire exam development program. So anyone who's been involved in the exam development program has their photo and the explanation of what they did in the yearbook. And we keep those online so folks can go and look at who those people were who were involved in the program. And just this year, because we've been online, we have started a couple of new offerings as well to help boost our community. One is an item writer consultant forum where we have consultants or mentors, if you will, who are working with the writers, actually having an online forum and talking about challenges and talking about items. And that happens on a quarterly basis. And we'll be continuing that after the you know, everyone's kind of back to meeting face to face, I believe. We'll continue those online. And another thing that we added was a newsletter for the program. We hadn't really done that in the past either. And this really helps to support writers or exam development volunteers on commonly asked questions, anything, educate them on specific topics, anything that's going on. For example, we've been working on recognizing and removing microaggressions from items, of course, and we use what we're calling our newsletter the plausible distractor, which is just hilarious. Of course, everybody thinks it's just a hoot. And we send videos and links and ways to get folks all on the same page before we meet in person or meet in person like this to kind of process items. So that's a great way to kind of keep the community connected and keep kind of information flowing to them as well. And it has been very helpful. And all of those have been big kind of boons to making sure that we have folks that will be ready to come back and do face-to-face work when the time comes.
Thank you. I love a good pun, so I appreciate that newsletter name.
Great. Yeah. Thanks.
All right, I'm going to kick it over to Nancy from SHRM.
Thanks, Taylor. So SHRM does it a little bit differently. We are currently 100% remote. We stopped doing in-person well, in March of 2020, and we don't think we will go back anytime soon. So what we try to do ahead of time is we try to link the project work assignments to the subject matter's area of strength. So we do a self-assessment ahead of time to gauge their strengths, and then we assign those areas as their writing assignment. We found that they're less engaged if the work assignment does not align to their expertise. And then with regard to activity design, HR people are a little bit different. They have a tendency to be engaged because they're committed to the work, knowing that the future of the profession is at stake and that their work is the gateway for future examinees who are aspiring to enter the profession. So we typically work that into our discussions as we present the parameters of any activity that we're doing. Now, for a future state, we're planning on trying something a little bit different to take engagement to the next level by more deeply tying the assessments to the areas that the subject matter experts are passionate about versus giving them a larger assortment of topics that they self-rate as high on as their level of expertise, but they're not necessarily passionate about writing items on those topics, because the people that have a tendency to lose interest, and those are the people that are harder to keep engaged as you're doing follow up with them in a virtual environment. So we would pair this with a visualization exercise that we currently do, which is if you were an examinee again, sitting through the exam and thinking about the types of items that you wish were on the test or that you would develop if given the opportunity, pair these topics that you're most passionate about with this visual exercise. Okay, now have that in your head. Okay, proceed. And then we do a variety of follow-up activities with them. So we do some things pre-workshop, we do some onboarding, and then we have continuous communication. So pre-workshops, we have a tendency to open the meetings 30 minutes early. Taylor, I like the idea of the music, and I'm thinking that we could poll our SMEs and ask them to send their favorite songs, or something that's representative of their country, because we do have about 30% international representation for each one of the panels across the 30 odd activities that we do. And so between the different activities, we have several hundred people participate in the critical incident activity, but usually between like 15 and 25 people participate in the other 29 or so activities. So we have quite a few SMEs, close to 1,000 each year. So we definitely need to do things to get them engaged ahead of time. And with 30% of them being outside the United States, it's a primary goal of ours through the pre-workshop activities to get the participants to engage not only with the staff, but with each other. And then we ask them to please, bring forward any lingering questions that you might have, so we could answer those before we begin. Pre-workshop, we also post an icebreaker on the screen and encourage participants to engage as they join. When we were in person, we used to do fun things like, what's the most interesting job you've ever had, or the most bizarre summer job you ever had, or the most fun trip you've ever been on, or if you had all the money in the world and could do anything in the world, what would you do? You get a lot of really interesting answers to those kinds of questions. Some of them are like, I never thought of that. But, so now that we do icebreakers virtually, we try to keep it short, sweet, and to the point. We also have a more formal meet and greet during breakout sessions. So when we break the groups of 20 to 25 people out into the breakout groups of 5 participants in each group, we invite the veteran writers to provide words of wisdom. If a new SME asks a question, and the veteran can better address it informally than in a larger group. This tends to be very organic and has become a great opportunity for networking and informal discussion in the breakout groups. But we do also try to encourage them to engage with each other as much as possible, not just the veterans giving advice, but in any way that they feel is important to moving the project forward, we encourage them to engage. So onboarding is something that we do through a comprehensive communication strategy That includes what's involved, the time commitment, their rewards, their compensation. We do pay some of them. Some of them we only pay with professional development credits that go toward their recertification cycle. We include how to sign up and all that kind of good stuff. And then we developed a recruitment page for our website that sort of reinforces all of that stuff that happens for onboarding. I can certainly paste the URL in the chat if people are interested in that. But the communication strategy is something that we really have taken a lot of painstaking effort to chunk it down into digestible amounts of information, deciding when to send it, how to best communicate the information, how to best present the information, with the goal being to stave off attrition, because we all know that some SMEs just like some of them ghost you, some of them just quit, some of them finish half their assignment and like something came up and I can't finish it. So our communication strategy is really designed to build off previous communications that were sent and expand upon that communication. And it doesn't make it look like we're hurting the SMEs so much, which we got a lot of complaints about. It's like, quit pommeling us with information that's redundant, because we don't understand what's relevant at this point in the process. So we've done a lot of communication with that. And then as follow-up, then both our staff and HUMRO staff that we work on can really do a great job of continuing to engage the participants, so no one ever feels like they're out on a desert island and left alone. So that's pretty much it.
Great, thank you. And Nancy, you do have a few requests for the URL you mentioned in the chat.
I just posted it. Okay.
You're already on it.
Okay.
All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next question. And I'm going to start with Alejandra on this one, since we just heard from Nancy. But what are some effective strategies for virtual engagement?
I think that primarily it's frequent communication. We have, prior to the pandemic, we had a strong SME base. And like Levine mentioned, we'd take them out to really nice places around the world. We have a global base audience, and therefore SMEs. So we'd go to every part of the world. So a lot of the people that we have that are SMEs now are the ones that were experiencing that a year ago. And so they miss meeting their counterparts from other regions and other industries. So keeping communication between us and them is important, but also enabling communication with each other. Networking has always been a strong aspect of why they come to our sessions. And so creating a virtual version of that where they have each other's emails or the WeChat, the other chats. We build those groups so they can talk with each other. We also strongly build those relationships. So if we see that there's something happening in a certain part of the world, we reach out to our SMEs in that area. Hey, how are you doing? How are you doing in this because of this impact, because this terrible thing happened? But also positive things. Hey, we saw on LinkedIn, you got a promotion. Congratulations, that's awesome. So we have over 1,000 SMEs, and we're trying to build that further. So it is a little bit challenging to keep up with them, but we have a role specifically for that management. And I feel that really keeps them engaged. I will say I've worked with a lot of SME groups in different industries. PMI people are very engaged. There's a lot of emotion involved. We have a lot of people that are so proud of the credential and the network, and they're going to bend over backwards to help us keep it being an international standard for project management, and they are proud and happy to help. We also have PMI haters, and those are very useful as well. So for when we're doing global practice analysis, yeah, we have our PMI camp, but we also make sure to engage with those that hate PMI, that refuse to have a credential with us. And we say, hey, great, come tell us about why PMI doesn't work at all for you, because we need to know what you're doing on your job and why we're not meeting those needs. And if we have people that take the exam and they pass it, because they do have to pass to at least write questions. For the global practice analysis, they don't, but for the other things we do, And they write to us to say, you know, I had to take this for my job. My promotion was dependent on it, but this is so not what my job is like. It doesn't apply at all, etc. We're like, great, talk to us. Hey, we're having this session on this later on, or we're having this writing workshop. Please come, please be a part of it and help us become better. So part of our engagement is already the emotion that people have tied to the credential and to the organization, both positive and negative, and working with that and using that emotion to be like, great, you love us, come help us make this better. Oh, well, you hate us? You know, tell us why. Come help us be better. That's kind of our basic message to everybody is help us be better. Whether you love us or you hate us, come help us be better. And that's really a big part of the engagement piece for us.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to go back to Nancy. I know, Nancy, you embedded some teasers for this question in your last response, but build on it for us.
Okay, so effective strategies for virtual engagement. Of course, there's a prior to the project, during the project, and after the project. We really do focus on the essence of keeping the communication stream worthwhile and focusing on project updates that are following steadily and in a measured flow, so it's not so overwhelming. We ensure that we provide participants an opportunity to meet and greet and discuss concerns pre-workshop and continue to maintain open communication until project completion. So when we met in person, we did the same kinds of thing. We had everybody meet for breakfast together. We would walk over from the hotel to the facility. Obviously, we can't do that now, but a lot of the folks have told us that they are able to have that critical engagement with their colleagues to continue networking across the globe. We used to allow people to take pictures, but then people were, again, HR is a little bit of a different industry, and people were finding out who the item writers were because they were posting their photos on social media, and then people would reach out to the item writers to get sort of like inside tips on how to pass the exam, and it's like, oh no. So we had to stave that off a little bit, but we do still provide opportunities for people to see each other face to face on the virtual presentations. So that helps them continue that very important meet and greet function that happens throughout all of our workshops. So we also encourage them to keep their cameras on during the virtual events so that all the participants feel a sense of belonging, part of the process. That's huge for us. We do try to keep them engaged as much as possible. And so people feel like, you know, I have to be completely engaged in this and paying attention. We also have knowledge checkpoints in terms of quizzes. When we were in person, we used to give them red and green cards that they could hold up for true and false. But we still sprinkle those throughout the training and use another kind of a mechanism. I at this point in time, I can't remember what it is, but we do ask them to still participate in those quizzes, and that helps to keep people engaged and make sure that they're absorbing the knowledge that we're presenting to them and not just simply staring at the screen. So at a much broader level in terms of engagement, our projects have a built-in element of flexibility. When it comes to scheduling, we always have a minimum of 3 training session times for every virtual review project, and that's the majority of the review projects are virtual reviews, whether it's bias, cultural sensitivity, content validation, effectiveness rating, and linking it to the right competency in the exam. Those are all virtual types of activities. The critical incident workshops that serve as the fodder for writing the scenarios behind the scenario dependent items in the situational judgment test items sets. Those are all virtual. So we try to keep some variety there and try to keep in mind that this is not the easiest thing to do. So we're just going to continue to provide as many options as we can to make them feel like they're more engaged, because our assumption is that they'd be less engaged if there weren't these elements of flexibility. But we're not going to road test that theory because we depend on these folks to put our tests together. We also always do our best to be flexible with international participants to ensure that we're fair to them. For example, we don't schedule our meetings only from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern time, because that's the middle of the night in Malaysia or China or Hong Kong or Australia or Africa or Europe sometimes has people that are, it's like, oh, that's too late for me. Are you going to have one that starts at a little bit later in the day because that's the morning time for me? So we also chunk it down into smaller periods of time and don't do them for 8 hours straight. We do them short periods of time because, 7 p.m. is 7 a.m. in India. And so you can do 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. and it's 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. in India. So those are some of the things that we tried to do. And since we've transitioned to 100% virtual, the biggest lesson that we've learned is the how to communicate thing, including when to initially communicate, how much information to communicate each time, and then how frequently to communicate. So I think that about wraps it up, Taylor.
Great. Thank you, Nancy.
Sure.
All right, we have a couple of minutes before we're scheduled to move on to our next question. So, Barry, are there any questions that you think would be suitable to throw out to the panel now?
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple of questions from Tiffany. Thanks, Tiffany, for putting those in. Louina, you kindly put those in response to those about compensation. So that was helpful. Thank you. I think there was a question about another one. One, I guess, to the panelists so far, just in terms of the size of your organisations. Sort of the size of the sort of the staff or department that work with the SMEs, for example, is there a department of staff the size of 2, 3, or 4 or more doing the work? I guess I'm just curious about the sort of the scale of the teams that are supporting the SMEs.
Thanks, Barry. So let's start off with Jared.
Thank you. So I would say from a size of department, we are a department of 9 inside of NCARM that focus on the examination. Our structure, though, is that we try to do a staff liaison assigned to a various working subcommittee that oversees probably about 30 to 40 people is how we typically do it from a staff liaison perspective. And then we also, inside of our department, have our own test development specialists that work with the volunteers in writing items. So that's part of that staff of 9.
Great, thanks. Alejandra?
So my team is 11 people. That's not just our exam developer group, but also our test security individuals. We have one person that their whole job is volunteer management. And they're the ones that are in constant contact, that do our recruiting efforts. We use Lineup to kind of keep everything together and make it easy for her to do that. Exam developers, they manage a particular product or test form. So when there's a particular activity, we're going to do this workshop to write items for the next form. They'll work with the individuals that are identified by our volunteer manager for that specific project, and they'll take over that piece. For most of our exams, that's 30 to 40 SMEs that they'll be working with through a project. For our larger PMP exam, that's about 100. And so we have the one person that's their job is to engage with volunteers. But then we have each exam developer that manages for a particular project their identified SMEs. And then everybody chips in as necessary. If we're facilitating workshops, everybody on the team, including myself, will facilitate a session, which we have found virtually the magic number is 4 hours. That's going to get us the most SMEs from as many time zones as we can do and keep them engaged for the time period.
I think if we had a poll, that would probably be the leading estimate of ideal workshop time, or at least the fringes of where you can push them to.
Yep.
Great. All right, Nancy, can you talk a little bit about your squad?
Sure, a squad's a good way to put it, because it's a group of 4 people and they do everything together. They really work together as a collaborative team. And then there's a couple of other leaders that provide expert level expertise. Our certification is only 7.5 years old. And so we are still building the team. We're currently a total team of 15, and we are soon to be adding a position to the exam development team, so it'll be a team of 5. But we currently have one person that's responsible for the entire recruitment effort, and then we have a variety of people that are involved in all of the activities. But the 3 that are currently in the what I call the triumvirate, they attend everything, and they bring different pieces of expertise to the pieces of the puzzle. There's substantive editors, there's structural editors, and then there's someone who has a great deal of experience in test item development. So but it is a small but mighty team, and of course we have a huge cohort over at Humro, and we all work very well together, I'm pleased to say.
Thanks for the plug.
Sure.
And Lavina.
Thank you. Let's see, we have 18 staff in the exam services department at ASWB. 4 of those are dedicated to working with subject matter experts. So 4 of those are in exam development. 2 of those work with accommodations and special arrangements. So we have quite a few of those in the social work profession, so we want to be responsive to that. And then we have 12 people who work in the Candidate Services Center, registering folks to take the exam, answering any concerns or questions, and leading them where they need to go. And then we have total, it's about 150 people, in terms of volunteers and paid item writers total, including those 18 who work on the program. So it's about 135 social workers who are invested in this work for the social work licensing exam.
Thanks. So hopefully that should give folks a sense for kind of the scale of these programs, and they're certainly, based on my experience, larger in terms of the amount of staff that are dedicated. I know many of you are probably a one-person shop, and so some of these techniques and strategies may or may not be suitable. But at least for me, I know I've picked up a few tidbits so far that I think could be applicable for a program of almost any size. So we're going to resume our regularly scheduled questions now. And feel free to keep putting your questions in the chat. Barry will be on top of those. All right, so this question is for Jared. How do you evaluate the quality of SME input or products?
So Taylor, I think this is actually what we do is something I would hope every size organization can do, both large or small. I will actually talk about a little bit about the how, the who, and the what. So, I mean, how we go about evaluations is we use the lineup software to go and let multiple people evaluate the product. So it's not just one person saying, oh, Jared's a good volunteer. That we can't trust one person's opinion, right? So you really want to triangulate. And so what we do is it's really about the who. The who people that evaluate are, I mentioned earlier, we have this coordinator model. And so we let the coordinator actually evaluate the frontline volunteer. And that gives us really good feedback on content quality, like how good is this person at writing an item or actually doing the homework and reviewing. So that's the first part of the who. The second part of the who is the staff liaison. The staff liaison who's in charge of that committee also is responsible for like evaluating each of our volunteers. They're looking at content a little bit, but they're also looking at engagement. Like, how is this volunteer engaging with a committee? Are they timely? Do they actually talk to other people during the social hours or not? And how does that work? And what's the vibe of the person? So we do that as well. And then the third part is our committees also have a chair. And what we do on our structure, we have our work groups, but there's a chair that oversees, it's also a volunteer that oversees all of the work groups. And we also have the chair evaluate individuals as well, because the other thing we look for is we're always looking for leadership potential. And that's one of the rating scales that we have built into this application that we measure people on is, are you somebody that we see moving up either in our organization onto other committees inside of our organization? And even we've had volunteers start writing items as those recently licensed architects that are now serving on state licensing boards, that they have become so committed to the organization and the cause that they've reached out to their governors and said, I want to get involved on a regulatory licensing board because I think this is so valuable. So I think this idea of looking beyond just, did you write 15 items or 50 items or whatever the homework assignment is, but looking at the bigger picture of evaluating what these people do and how they do it is critical to success.
Thanks so much. And Alejandra, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, so we also use lineup, and we have every person evaluated, not just the SMEs, but also the facilitators sometimes, including myself. Everybody is evaluated. So those in the workshop evaluate the facilitators and the leaders, and those that are writing items are evaluated by their group facilitators. And it's across projects, so they'll have different evaluations for each individual project that they're on. We, of course, look at their, the psychometric reviews and audits with their individual feedback. We note, this person isn't really good at working with the group. Maybe they should do this type of work as opposed to this other type of work. And we have those types of notes. And that's about the person, but about their work, we're of course following the psychometrics for the items and the group work. So for this project, we had this group of 100 people, and the output of this weekend was 500 versus our usual 600 items or something along those lines. Or when they're field tested, we had a 60% keep rate as opposed to a 70% keep rate. So we look at those metrics as well when we're evaluating both the individuals and the groups, and even just how we design each workshop. And we learn from that, and we adjust to increase both quantity and quality along the way.
Great. Lavina or Nancy, anything else to add?
We focus a lot on trying to salvage as many of those that before they wind up on the cutting room floor. So we spend a lot of time looking at those that are tagged during review sessions as must drop or revise, so that we can revise as many as we can so we can keep them and get them into field testing.
So Nancy, I was reacting because at first I thought when you said cutting room floor, I thought you were talking about your volunteers and not your items. And I was like, wow, you were harsh.
No, well, we're pretty harsh on volunteers too. Sorry to say, but we can tell if somebody's not cutting the mustard. If someone is given an assignment and you're asked to write 14 items and you struggle to write 9 and 7 of them wind up as must drop or revise, there's no discussion. It's like that person's not getting invited back. Sorry.
I will say, so Alejandra, I think you made a really good point though. It's sometimes they're just not the right fit for, like you said, item writing. And one thing we've done at NCARB is we have sort of broken item development down into parts. So we have a committee that's only about assembling our form. So they don't have to write items. They're basically doing quality control review of items that are already written. We have another committee that only develops case study resources. And people may find their happy place in a different committee, because not everybody is, as we know, cut out to be an item writer, but they might be a really good volunteer somewhere else, or even on the policy committee. Maybe they're just really good at policy and strategy, but come on, we all have volunteers that don't do homework, but are really smart, and you love to have them in the room. And it's about figuring out, their skills and then using those skills to put them in the right place that's best for the organization.
Yeah, we did actually start doing that. By the way, we use lineup too, but we actually have started, before someone can actually be an initial item writer, they have to go through technical review, which is where all the substantive content edits occur, because we figure that that way they can get a realistic preview of this is what item writing looks like. And then if they're not comfortable making edits to things that other people have written, then that tells us something too. But most people who participate in technical review do wind up then saying, I'd like to try my hand at this. So, but I don't want to preempt my entire answer to number 5.
Yeah, and Nancy, I agree with you. We don't make it a rule, but I do find that I get better items from people that started off with review first. They are more critical. They know what we're looking for. They know what is not going to work. So when they write their own items, they have all those lessons learned already in there. So I do like that. We don't require it because depending on the workshop, you need to fit this many writers, this many reviewers. But I think it's a preferred cycle to start with review.
Yeah, and just as, you know, job analysis or practice analysis can serve as a cornerstone for an assessment, taking stock of what knowledge, skills, and abilities tend to promote success in different roles that SMEs play is also an effective strategy that we've used. And so we've kind of built these SME roadmaps and, you know, identified what characteristics do tend to produce successful SMEs. Is it writing skills? Is it critical thinking? Is it conscientiousness, detail orientation? And then just ask them to self-evaluate on some of these qualities, you know, in hopes of providing them a good fit, a mutual good fit. And I think that, you know, to the extent we can describe how if you're in a role that suits your preferred work style and your strengths, then everything is going to be more successful. So taking that kind of work analysis approach to break down the SME roles can also be a helpful strategy as a starting point. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to our next question. So this question, we'll start off with Nancy here. How do you balance the benefits of using experienced SMEs with getting new perspectives?
Well, it's kind of a delicate balance, but I think a really good analogy to illustrate what goes on with our participant population is that it's somewhat of a revolving door. We don't have a standing committee like some other programs, but we definitely have a list of optimal performers who are in like a top tier of their own, and they participate either regularly or we rotate them. So we sort of like spread the wealth. If we have a group that we're going to have a particularly larger cohort of new people, then we'll have the strongest people return and go to that cohort because they provide the best kind of coaching. Some others phase themselves out. They like, I need a break, but I want to come back. And so we'll give them a couple cycles out and then have them continuously loop back in. But we also continuously recruit new participants, and we've tried a couple of different things. We've tried let anybody who's interested participate. I'll tell you that doesn't work. We've also recently decided to revert to our original philosophy when I started in this division, because I've been at SHRM forever, but I've only been in this division for like 5 years, which was you have to be in the top 10% of examinees inside the United States and the top 20% outside the United States. And the reason that we went top 20% of scores outside the United States is because the population outside the United States is far smaller than inside the United States. It's growing, but we still decided to do that factor. And so we're reverting to that now, because our experience was that the people who did well on or did better on the exam actually write better items. And they have the tendency to demonstrate, for example, conscientiousness, which is something that Taylor and I have had a lot of conversations about, like how do you assess the conscientiousness? Because if there were a way to do it, we definitely asked that question in our pre-recruitment surveys. So our focus is definitely on the primary initial writing projects, because we have more than ample interest with a healthy mix of veterans and new participants for those projects. Although we do seem to increasingly have a healthy mix of veteran and newbies for the other review sessions too. So especially during the situational judgment item workshops, I don't know how many of you do situational judgment items, but we always pair, you pair off in that one for our workshop. So we always have a veteran with a new person, because veterans might have a tendency to get bogged down in like, this is the way I usually do it. And it's like, well, but we have a fresh voice, so listen to the fresh voice, because they're just as engaged in this process as you are. So the dynamics of having the mix of new and veterans really contributes better to the overall process for that. And it adds a nice component where the veteran can coach the new participants. So they might have a better grasp of the process. They might have a better understanding of the pacing, but the new participants definitely add the fresh insights. And we also include the new folks when because we found that dynamic is also true for the technical review, and though because those occur in real time, and that tells us something really important, because if someone is not catching on to the pace early on because they're unfamiliar with the process or they're unfamiliar with the aspects of the review, then that tells us something about how we can do the training a little bit differently. But if the review were purely new participants, it would probably go a lot slower and we wouldn't get as many items reviewed because they might not be comfortable speaking up or jumping out on a limb to criticize the work that was, or an error that they see, because they don't want to be perceived as, you know, jumping all over content that veteran item writers have written. So it really is, again, a delicate balance and a lot of trial and error. And we figure out something that works and then we exploit it in a good way. And then we stop doing things that don't work and we try something else different and then just repeat that cycle.
Great, thanks, Nancy. I'll turn it over to Lavina.
Okay, so in terms of how we balance these benefits, we, again, I think I said this earlier, but we really deliberately attempt to make selections for beginning item writers and then on up. So that's where it starts. These item writers enter the program. And then we balance these groups for demographics as they move through the program. So again, we want to make sure that we have folks who can talk about minimal competence and what that looks like. First day on the job, like I said earlier, do no harm. And we found folks with decades of experience, you know, like Jared kind of mentioned, it sometimes can be difficult for them to get back to that space of kind of being in that first day on the job. So this is why it's so important. And so it was interesting that Tiffany asked a question earlier that I wanted to kind of bring back into this, which is, you know, once our item writers go from writing and getting paid for it, which is done remotely, except for the training, right? That's all done remotely. Then they move to the exam committee, which is an appointment. It's a 3-year appointment for folks to meet 4 times a year. And so as we talk about this in terms of, you know, younger SMEs and older SMEs, we've found it really difficult, and I would be very interested if any of the other panelists had any input on this. We've found it difficult to retain the 20, 30 somethings beyond item writing. When we start meeting with them in person, they struggle to make the commitment, even with all the swag, even with all the fun networking stuff, because that's the time when people are, well, they're having babies, they're doing what, you know, maybe they're getting more degrees, things like that. And then people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s are like totally bought in. They're like dug in like ticks. We can't get rid of those folks. But it's the 20, 30 somethings that we are trying to recruit and retain. And we want to be fun and woke and all, you know, all the rest of the things to try to get those people in. And we're struggling with how to have that face-to-face commitment and what that can look like. So so that's really kind of where we stand in terms of this. We always try to balance those groups, but for the 20, 30 somethings, when it comes to exam committee, we're always also finding replacements a lot for them, letting them continue their 3-year term, but they can't always make it to every single meeting. And that makes it hard, of course, to gel and hard to get the work done and all the rest of it. So that's our struggle with our commitment. We have a commitment to do this, but we're still struggling. So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like just the fact that you're using the term woke probably means that you are on your way to being woke. So, all right, let's go ahead and move on to our last question. And I'll direct this one to Alejandra first. How do you compensate SMEs?
All right. So I wrote down like little ideas for all these questions. First of all, we avoid paying them. as much as possible. One, because we have a large pool of SMEs and we really can't afford to pay all of them. But secondly, there's all these, we work with people from around the world. There's a lot of difficulty as far as tax implications and how to get payment. And if we're working in certain areas, then legally we really can't even give them money because of political concerns. So that is something that we really stay away from. But we do, first of all, give them recognition for what they do. Like I said, our SMEs are very dedicated to PMI and mostly to the PMP. So anything that's PMI saying, hey, yay, thanks for helping us, they're very proud of it. And they post it on all their social networks and media and everything. I know Nancy mentioned she doesn't, SHRM no longer allows photography. We still do photography, but we recognize the issue, the pressure that people would get when others realize, hey, these people have access to the questions. And so all of our recognition is broad on, assisting certification. There's so many activities from standard setting to translation validations and analysis design, et cetera. So we first of all make sure that we're vague. Hey, you're helping certification, but not on what. We also tell them we actually have templates for them to use when people reach out to them, what they can say and not say, how they can respond, so that they do get that recognition without getting that real honest to God pressure about, divulging those questions, especially if you work in an organization, you're working at a PMO, for example, and there's people trying to get the PMP, you have that pressure from your group to help them out. So we try to balance recognition with harassment, really, and not getting our people harassed. But that's one thing. When we were in person, we went to cool places, we had lots of food, and we tried to be like close to a beach and they could go to the beach afterwards. We'd have those networks. Virtually, what we've tried to do is provide food when we're meeting with them, or we still reimburse them. So they could have a receipt, say, hey, I spent this much on my own lunch, and we'll still reimburse them. Or we'll send a gift card, depending on the country, if it's feasible or not, for the amount we would have normally reimbursed them. So it's not considered money. It doesn't go through the same taxation issues. It's just, you spent money on food, working for, helping us out, we're going to cover that food. Our SMEs particularly love insider information. Of course, company confidential stuff is confidential and it doesn't go to them, but we would present, here's our roadmap, here's where we think we're going, these are new ideas that we're having, and they love that. They love being the first to know, to bring it back to their organizations and saying, hey, PMI is thinking about this or that in the next coming year. That is capital for them in their organizations. And so that works really well for us. Of course, we also have the tchotchkes, the branded masks, or all the little things, t-shirts and sweaters, towels, anything PMI that they love. Sometimes being a SME is considered a compensation for them. So they work for us developing items, for example, and we say, hey, we're looking at this new product. It's a training and maybe a micro-credential. Do you want to be one of the thought leaders that we know that you've been in construction for this many years? We have a construction specific product that we're working on. And we'd love for you to be a part of that committee. And they love that. They consider that a reward for being our SME, being one of the first in a new credential, or to give it its path and strategy. So those are all different ways that we try to compensate our SMEs while avoiding payment.
Thanks. I really love the idea of sharing the insider knowledge. It's, free for you, but definitely whets their appetite and can also help get feedback on where you're planning to go. So I really like that idea. Thanks so much. All right, Jared, do you have anything else to add to this one?
Well, I'll follow up, Taylor, with just what you were talking about, the insider information. We've been doing that for quite some time too. And like you had said, it's not just telling them, but it's also listening. So we do every one of our meetings, we start with kind of the NCARB update, and it allows them to give us feedback, and then we carry it back, because volunteers do want to believe that they can be influential in the organization that they're volunteering for. So we have found that very valuable. Very much like PMI, NCARB does not reimburse directly. We don't do stipends. It is, we reimburse your expenses. We do try to take every committee to at least one location once a year. Lavina earlier mentioned that DC wasn't fun, or she said we go to one fun location and then to DC. But I mean, our volunteers, actually, we bring our volunteers to DC at least once a year. They enjoy, I mean, I live in DC, it's boring, right? But that's new to them, right? They like it. So DC's good. I'm not saying it's a bad city, Lavina. But we also do try, admittedly, we're architects, so we tend to take people downtown. We know it's stay in the suburbs. I hate staying in the suburbs, so it's stay downtown, fly in. It's the dinners, it's the social hour. I will tell you, I've had so many volunteers tell me over my time at NCARB that the networking is the biggest benefit to volunteering. Like, they do the work because they want to go to a meeting and meet architects from all across the country and listen and learn. And I totally get it, because what I know is that when you're a practicing architect in your town, every other architect is competition. When you're a practicing architect and you get to go to an NCARB meeting, everybody in that room from all over the country is not your competition. And they love that. So they can have open type conversations about business that you don't get to have with your local community of architects. And so it's creating time to allow them to do that. Like, we specifically will wrap our meetings early on a Saturday so that they can go just walk around the city, go get a nice dinner. That's really the repayment that we do provide. The other thing we do is, if you are specifically in our item writing group, you do get continuing education credit towards your license, which is a big deal for some. I mean, it just makes your life easy that by the time you've written all these items for NCARB, you don't have to do any more continuing ed for the year. Volunteers do appreciate that.
I will say we also do PDUs, professional development units. And because for our credentials, you have to recertify every 3 years. You can't get them all from volunteering. It's broken into pieces, but volunteering is a third of what you can get them for. So that is also a strong incentive for ours. And I just wanted to add, all of us has mentioned networking. It's a really big, across industries, a big draw. And we've struggled with it virtually, because when we were meeting in person, you could have it at the end of the day or the day before your session starts, have a cocktail hour or something like that. Virtually, you're struggling for those 4 hours. They're all in different time zones. So maybe they started really early or they're ending really late. And so what we're now starting to do is make a completely separate networking virtual event. So people that volunteered in a certain month will have a session, we'll vary the times for the sessions, and do, of course, breakout rooms. But besides that, have kind of targeted conversations, just like this panel. It's not all of us just talking, right? There were some questions, some feedback that we're getting. And so putting that into the networking sessions helps keep it manageable when everybody is virtual, and you could just talk over each other or someone doesn't get to speak. So it's semi-structured. And so we're finding a successful virtual way of doing that networking that would be more organic in person.
Thanks. That's a great point. I think that it'll be really interesting to see how many programs continue leveraging virtual sessions for SMEs, and kind of what the trajectory looks like there. All right. Anything else to add, Lavina or Nancy, to the compensation piece?
Monuments by Moonlight. That was very popular with our group. And most interesting thing that happened was a group that had been a bunch of veterans went down to do Monuments by Moonlight and then walked around downtown, because we're right outside DC too. I guess I should have mentioned that. And they sent me a picture of the 4 of them in front of a quote by Einstein about HR. And I'm like, y'all just need to go home and stop drinking. So yeah, it was actually a lot of really fun things. And they also volunteered to take on organizing the happy hours, the lunches, the dinners. So it's like, sure, you want to do that? That's something that the staff doesn't need to do, because it was like, who has what kind of allergy and what kind of food do they eat and that kind of stuff. And so it was like the subject matter experts took all of that over and like, sure, we'll be there. I got my credit card. And that's the other thing. We pay their expenses. So we reimburse them for meals and their hotel and everything. And so in addition to paying them a nominal honorarium, in addition to the recertification credits, which I'll answer Ann's question in the chat. We pay hour for hour for recertification credits. So if it's a 7-hour project, they get 7 professional development credits. If it's a 10-hour project, they get 10, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. So while we're on that question, do others want to weigh in on kind of the level of compensation via continuing education credits?
We did the hour per unit. Just it makes it easy.
And ours is similar, but in the architecture world, the continuing ed has to be in a face-to-face structured environment. It's one of the requirements. So like self-study doesn't count. So our volunteers don't get credit for all the time they put into doing the homework. It's really the structured review that takes place in the meeting that they get credit for. The reality is we make them do enough work and we have enough meetings that over the course of a year, you earn all of your continuing ed that you need as an architect.
Thanks. And Lavina, how do you guys handle this? Got it.
So, I'm sorry, this is Karen Conrad with we do a CCI, we do a cardiovascular credentialing, and we do triennial renewals. So our item writers all hold the credential for the committee they serve on, and we do the renewal of their credential for each triennial renewal as long as they're serving on the committee. Of course, we do the reimbursement and staying aware of things like, you know, their allergies or preferences. I periodically will do a profile asking things like, what's your favorite cake and things like that. And I try to work these into our various meals and events so everybody gets a little something that they enjoy and they know that it's for them. So it's, you know, kind of small ways to recognize as well.
Yeah, there's definitely a huge element of hospitality when you're hosting SME events and
Right.
having some support on those types of services, and you know, making the temperature comfortable in the room and the lighting comfortable and giving them enough space to spread all of their books and resources out. All of those little things really contribute to their creature comforts, I guess I should say.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. All right. So David asks, so no one pays per item. You know, I've certainly seen programs that do compensate per item, in particular if the items are surviving the development process and subsequent field testing. Do any of your programs compensate monetarily for production?
Yes, the social work exam does compensate for items by item, but we do it by contract actually. So that's 30 items. And they have to submit them in 10 item batches for review. And then once they're complete, the 30 items are complete and the consultant has approved them, then they get paid for that. So that's and then we do all the other things that the other panelists were talking about in terms of CE when item writers come in for training, but they're only doing this one time in their item writing career. And the rest of it is they're writing remotely and getting paid for it. So that's the only time that we do the compensation is for the item writing. After that, it's volunteer work, coming to nice hotels, you know, and being part of the community.
Thanks, that makes sense. All right, Barry, I know you've been monitoring our chat. Do we have any other questions for the panel?
Yep, there's a couple here, and I had one myself. It was interesting listening to all the detail you go into, like making sure that the item writers are taken care of. You know, one of our customers, I've sat in some of their committee sessions. You know, they fly them in and they take them out to dinner. And there's one of the guys that I know there that he'll go to the nth degree. He'll contact the restaurant to make sure that the wine's lined up, the starters are lined up. You know, just to make sure the flow of the evening is such that they don't have to kind of get bogged down. You know, it's just making it all just flow very nicely. And he also goes to that sort of. He showed me a piece of paper once where he knows all the item writers and he's got their names and he's looked at their bios and he's got some discussion points. So as he's sort of comparing the evening and getting these people involved to get them ready for the following day, he already knows a little bit about them, and he sort of triggers conversation and gets them involved that way. Couple of questions then. One was from Katya. What process and procedures do you ask your SMEs to follow to ensure security of question writing in a virtual environment? I don't know if who wants to pick up that one up? Volunteers, how I answer?
So I can tell you what we do. But number one, we just really have to trust our SMEs. So beyond that, we do have our NDA, which we have them renew every single year, and that's independent of whether it's virtual or in person. We require that they have their camera on at all times. We don't give them, so for the writing, they have access to the exam developer system, which is where we bank our items, and they write directly into that. If they're in a review session, they don't have access to the items. There is one person that's the lead reviewer, and that person has access to the items, and they'll put up on the screen, and everybody will contribute to the review. There's designated roles for each of the 5 people that review an item. And so they do their parts, but we try to limit access as much as possible. We, of course, remind them that they can't take screenshots, pictures, recordings during the event. You know, I could have my phone down here and you won't see it. So we have to just acknowledge that we don't have control over their environment. And so a lot of that has to come from building a strong relationship with our subject matter experts and being able to trust them to a large extent. That's what we do.
Great, thank you.
So, you know, I'll add on in a very similar way, we do the same thing, right? It's about training. We do also ask that when they're working remotely and writing items, we do limit their access to the item bank, but also just try to establish some parameters about like where you work, check your environment, because a lot of people might be writing items in an architectural office where there may be somebody in the office who's getting ready to take the exam. So one of the other things we also do is we, as part of your agreement to be an item writer, you're also agreeing to limit your involvement in any test preparation activities for the next several years. And that's also then part of our training, so they understand their role as an item writer versus what they may have been as a mentor, really trying to teach people how to pass the exam earlier. And I've had some volunteers that have been interested in working on some committees at NCARB and not specifically item writing because they don't want to stop helping other people prepare for the exam. That's great. Like, I get it. You'll be happy over here. You don't want to be an item writer because it would limit your ability to do that.
And we do the same thing.
Yeah. So we do 2 years. If you help on writing items, you can't do any test prep training, etc. for 2 years after that, or you risk losing your credential. But then for those that want to help with exams and don't want to limit themselves in other cases, we do include them in, for example, our analysis work, anything with JTA, global practice analyses, those pieces, they can still help the certification process. They just can't have access to questions. So we try to balance that out.
Great. So I think we have a couple more questions from the chat, but we do want to reserve some time for folks to ask kind of open questions. So Barry, do you want to lead us through?
Yeah. So thanks for those responses. That was very helpful. There was a question from Isba from NBCC. What is the SME retirement process? So what does that look like? What information? So what information you're interested to capture related to their experience? So is there like a debrief at the end post? Yeah. Who would like to take that? Maybe Lavina or Nancy?
I don't actually know how we handle that.
Oh.
I know we do it, but I haven't actually been part of the process for a while, and I'm sure it's changed. So I will not say something and make myself look stupid. Well, perhaps I already have.
Jared, you're nodding your head. Do you guys have a process for knowledge capture?
We do. Again, there's we're constantly tracking and actually surveying our members, you know, as they're getting to the end of each meeting and at the end of the year. And even all the way through, like I will say, there's a moment when you've been a long-serving volunteer and you're not going to be a volunteer anymore. And we're actually right at that time right now. This is very fresh in my mind. We're right at that time in our annual cycle. And we've had some long-serving volunteers where it's like you call them up on the phone and you have a conversation and you just talk to them, because it is about the long-term relationship with this organization. So you can't just send somebody an email and say, you know, hey, it's not me, it's you. Like, you can't do that, because you will completely undermine your organization as a whole. So sometimes it's a phone call, or it's a conversation at the end of the year, at the last meeting, when you know their term has sort of ran out and they're not going to be reappointed because they've sort of hit their limit. You pull them aside, you thank them, you listen to what they have to say for the future, but you let them know how much they truly are appreciated.
We don't have any terms for retirement for most of our SMEs. The only exception is appeals board. So when someone leaves, it's because they've decided to take a break or end, and those are, like Jared said, individual conversations, and they have their own personal reasons for leaving. Most often it's because they're retiring, or because they've moved on beyond for example, our most common credential PMP. They're no longer a project manager, and they don't feel that they're in touch with that anymore. So those are the most frequent reasons. And the appeals board is stated from the beginning, you will serve for 6 months. So when the 6 months is done, everybody's off. And they know that ahead of time.
Same for social work. Folks are aware of it ahead of time, so they can prepare themselves, you know, as we're always kind of thinking of termination, right, in terms of beginning process with our clients anyway. So it's the same way in this particular thing, where they are aware of what that endpoint is, and then we can invite them back to do the form review. And so that's for seasoned folks, which I find it very interesting that we've had this discussion, that is a good way to bring folks in. So certainly something to help me, you know, broaden my thinking on that. But yeah, that's how we do it. And so we have a celebration at the end. We do an awards ceremony where we talk about that person, how awesome they are. We actually have their committee present them with stuff. So we have folks bringing things. They'll stop at the airport and bring things from where they live and bestow these gifts upon people at these meetings, and we send them a plaque. Now, if folks are not cutting it for item writing, and they decide that it's not a good fit, or we decide it's not a good fit, then they would receive a letter and then a kind of commemorative thank you for your work on the exam kind of thing. But yeah, they kind of know when it's time for them to say goodbye, but then they can still stay in touch with the newsletter and things like that if they want to know what's going on with the program.
Thanks so much. Barry, any other questions we want to field, or do we want to go ahead and turn it over for open questions?
There's no more in the chat. I think a good time to field any other questions.
And we do want to reserve a few minutes at the end for announcements and job postings. So please do feel free to ask additional questions either in chat or come off mute and vocalize your question. Or we also have a fun activity to end the session. So create your own adventure, everyone. All right, well, I'm going to share the activity, and we can ask questions while people are completing it. So to end our, to end our session today, we're going to do an activity where you're going to post in Padlet one thing you learned today that you're going to use on the job. And I will also, and if you're not comfortable using a QR code, I'm going to paste the link to the Padlet in the chat. You can feel free to put it there. You don't have to attribute it to yourself or anything. You can just share what you plan to apply in your job. And while we're doing that, if anyone else has any questions that they want to put in chat, feel free to do it. I guess that we could be playing some more delightful music.
When you said fun activity, I thought it was going to be along the lines of what's the weirdest summer job you ever had? And then someone could contribute, I sorted cucumbers that became pickles. We actually had somebody contribute that as an odd job. And 2 live window mannequins in department stores. It's like, yeah, okay.
There's a lot of pathways that lead into HR.
I'm telling you.
Okay, so my name's David, and yes, I picked cucumbers and separated them for pickles.
Did you? Okay.
real-
For real.
Amazing.
Yeah, it sounded like a fascinating job because I never realized that it was that important to get the right size cucumber for the right size of pickle. But there you
Oh,
go.
yeah.
And the odd ones that are bent don't go to the spares pile. The dill spears pile. They go into the ones that become dill chips. And I'm like, yeah, who knew?
Real deal.
All right, well, our lessons learned are piling in now, so thank you all for sharing kind of your key takeaways. Feel free to keep adding them. I'm sharing them on the screen. And at this point, I wanted to open it up for anyone that may have announcements or job postings to share. If you have a link to your job posting, feel free to put it in the chat. But the floor is yours.
Hey guys, this is Cynthia Allen. I do want to do a plug for the CNG nominations that are coming up. The board will be accepting nominations for both board positions as well as for the planning committees, which we typically have a planning committee in DC and in Chicago. There's been a lot of kind of all over planning since we're still virtual. So please take a look at the CNG website. It's a great opportunity as we're talking about engaging subject matter experts to lend your subject matter expertise and help organize these events. So please consider that.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Hi, Taylor. It's Holly Sorello from DRC. I just want to make an announcement that we're hiring for a senior psychometrician. It's out on a lot of the websites, LinkedIn, ICE, etc. But if anybody has any references, please pass it my way.
Thank you, Holly. All right, well, I feel like we should end the session how we began. I'll play some music. You guys can keep adding your learnings. We'll stick around if anyone wants to chat or talk. Thank you guys so much. And also thank you to my fellow program planning committee members who helped put this session together, and to our panelists for volunteering your valuable time and wisdom to share with us today. I think we're all going to be a little bit better at managing and engaging SMEs because of some of the tools and techniques and strategies that you all shared today. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, you guys can see on the tablet all of the fabulous takeaways that folks had from the session today. It was very helpful.
It does seem like music at the start of all meetings is the most popular.
Yeah, we had a presenter. So for another professional association, before the conference, we do pre-conference workshops, and I'm on the workshop planning committee. And we moved all of the workshops virtual last year, and so we had a trainer come in and teach our presenters some strategies for engagement, and he was so awesome. So I actually got him to come present at Humro a few weeks ago, and he used music, and everyone was just like dancing on their webcams, and it was super fun. So it's definitely going to be a permanent fixture in any workshops or virtual meetings that I'm involved in.
Taylor, who did you use? Because SHRM's always looking for people to do that kind of thing.
Sure, he's a professor in the management department at the University of Houston downtown. I can send you his name. His name is Zahir Latif.
Okay.
But he's excellent.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So Lavina, I'll follow up with one of the comments you made was about engaging with a younger group, right? That 25 to 30-year-old, and right, it's hard to keep them around.
Yes.
So I think the challenge we all have is actually this idea of restructuring how we do our work to fit their life. Because like you said, they're busy. Our early career professionals are starting families, like you said, getting an advanced degree. And the idea of the heavy work that we typically do in some of our committees, it just doesn't fit. And so NCARB's actually trying to figure out how to break that down into more of those like micro volunteering opportunities to get them to engage, because they honestly cannot commit the time that, like you said, the 50-year-old firm owner can, because the firm owner can be like, hey, everybody, I own the firm. I'm going to go work on my NCARB stuff for 4 days.
Right.
Peace out. You can't do that when you're 32 years old. Like, you don't get that opportunity. So we're actually going to know how to restructure.
Well, we'll be interested to learn more about that and see how it goes for you all. Oh, and I also wanted to say DC's not a bad place. It's just close to us. It's just close to us. So not that we mind. And of course, all the volunteers coming in, they think it's awesome. So that was my perspective. That was the microaggression from my perspective, kind of seeping out a little bit. So yeah, apologize for that. DC's awesome.
Where do you send Lavina? Because I think you said at the beginning there was DC, but then you said somewhere fun.
Somewhere fun, Nashville, Charleston, San Diego.
Oh, yeah.
West.
So we send our SMEs before the pandemic all over the world. It's part of the reason I took this job, was for that. Like, Macau, Athens was our next stop. That got canceled because of COVID. The last place we went to was Ghana. So we send them to really awesome places. And I'm just amazed when they're like, but can we go to your office? Can we take a tour of the building? I'm like, sure. Cubicles over here, lunchroom over there. But they love it. They love it. They're like, I've been to PMI headquarters. So, what we have to constantly remember to look at things from their perspective and not our own.
Yeah, I know.
SHRM too. Can we go to SHRM headquarters?
Yeah, I was
Sure.
going to say that our SHRM SMEs love to go do a tour of the facility.
We used to.
And they take pictures of themselves at SHRM headquarters, and I'm like, okay.
When we started doing our conferences, it was always in London, and most of the organisations we were working with at that point, they were all from London. But the problem we had at that point is that then they would just disperse in the evening. They would go back home. So what we decided to do was start doing these events around the UK. So it would be, we'd get them out of London to go to Newcastle, to Edinburgh, to Cardiff, to Dublin, to Amsterdam, and all of a sudden, it was as cheap to fly to these places as it was to get a train to London. So it was more interesting. We got some neat places. It generated conversation, and it was always fun.
It's more of a captive audience as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we've had that issue with virtual attendance, people can drop off last minute. I'm not really feeling good today. I'm just gonna stay home. Well, I'll be there, except I have to take my kids to soccer for this 1 hour. And it's like, no, you're supposed to be there the whole time. So there are benefits to taking them somewhere outside of their usual area.
All right, well, we have 10 minutes left. We can stick around and chat, or we can go ahead and close out, whatever everybody prefers. I'm waiting for my...
Cynthia. I'd go ahead and close out, just give people a little extra time back on their calendar. Thank you guys so much for the panel. This was really great information. I took a ton of notes.
Yeah, thank you all.
Happy to be here.
All right, well, hope everyone has a great week and a long holiday, at least if you're here in the U.S., and happy 4th of July.
Thanks,
Take care.
everyone.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thank you.